Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Success Life in the Masters series. I have got to tell you, I have been so looking forward to this conversation with Larry. Larry runs the Good Dad Project, and he has a book titled The 9 Simple Ways to Have Unlimited Patience, Improved Relationships, and Positive Lasting Memories. I thought, if it's only 9 steps, I'm in, because I'm a dad. And I'm kind of a little bit on the simpleton side. So anything beyond like that 10th or 11th rule, I just totally mess up. But really what I think we're in this really unique position right now, not only as dads, but as uncles, as grandparents, as men of influence, or men trying to become influential in our children's and the children's lives that we can impact. Because previously, we may have been doing the 9 to 5, the running and going and getting home in time just to take the next kid to soccer or ballet or swim team or pick them up from tutoring or drop them off someplace. That our lives up until now have kept us distracted and somewhat disconnected from our kids and our family. And, we could say there's always a silver lining, but truth is, there is a silver lining in this coronavirus 19 time. It's allowed us to sort of contract and pull back in and really slow down and breathe in to the roles and responsibilities that we have. And I have really loved reliving dad time. As many of you know, I took 3 years off and expatted, disconnected, sort of like went off the grid just to be with our kids while they were still young, to bond and build. And so this is reminding me of how much fun we used to have playing board games, playing card games, creating silly stories, making up dumb songs, just spending time walking and being together. And so I'm going to really invite you, why we're here with Larry and the Good Dad Project is really, I've sort of titled this Rediscovering Our Dad-ness, but I think there's more to it than just dad. But Larry's going to teach us about the dad thing, and then we can figure out how to make it work as an uncle, as a grandpa, is whatever the role that we play in our kids' lives. So let me go find our guest and bring him in. I think he's still munching on some virtual cookies in the green room.
What's going on? Good to see you.
Not much. I got to tell you, I am honored and humbled by what you do with the Good Dad Project and about building a legacy of fatherhood. Tell everybody a little bit about how you came to that journey and why you can speak from authority with 4.
Well, first of all, man, I got to tell you, Eric, you give me way too much credit. As you were sitting there reading the title of my book, I was like, Unlimited Patience. Yeah.
That word we were in school, right?
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a quote from Good Will Hunting that Robin Williams told, I forget, Matt Damon. He's like, I teach this stuff. I didn't say I could do it. So, right.
Preach.
That's right. My childhood, I kind of grew up bit of a crazy childhood. I'm happy to go into a little bit of detail with you if you want. Yeah. So, I mean, my mom and biological father were married I was married. If I can
They were married.
They were married. They were married. Blah, blah, blah. They were married for about 4 years. And then they had me 1975, and then they got divorced. But I think it was like 9 months or so after I was born. And then my dad, I think it was a pretty bitter divorce because they split. And I'll never forget this growing up. Like when I was a kid, at 4 years old, I was in preschool, and I remember men coming to pick up their kids, and I knew what a dad was, but I knew I didn't have one. Didn't bother me whatsoever because I didn't think I was missing out on anything. I didn't know any better. But my view of it is moms go out and find a dad, and my mom hadn't found ours yet. So no big deal with me. She'll find one sooner or later, I'm sure.
Sort of like Easter morning. Just go find a dad.
Yeah, just
go find an egg, go find a dad.
Yeah, he's out in the backyard. But she did bring home a man for the first time when I was 4. I think they had been dating for a while. They worked together. And I'll never forget this guy walking in our house. I was 4 years old. He had, like 1979 mustache, 3-piece suit, double Windsor tie, briefcase, no iPads back then. And I remember I looked up at this guy. My mom introduced me to him, and I was like, "Are you going to be my dad?" And that was the first question out of my mouth. And my mom, I remember like the awkwardness just being so present in that room. And they did get married, actually. They got married, and they were married for 5 years. He was a really nice man. He taught me a lot. He was ex-military. He was a highly successful data processor, software engineer type guy. Worked for Citicorp at the time. Allowed my mom to quit work and stay home with me, which I really enjoyed. And then every year that they were married, it just got worse and worse and worse. And like, so he was kind of a big drinker. And when he drank, that's when things really got kind of dark at our house. He was mentally, physically abusive. But again, when he was sober, super nice guy. Everyone really loved him. They got divorced when I was 10, and then he was gone. That was it. I had not seen him since. I actually ran into him one time by accident at a bar when I was like 22. So, and he was working the door, like as the door guy. And I was there on a date with a girl. So that was kind of weird. But going back to when I was 10, I started asking a lot of questions because I knew at that point, I was like, wow, I met this guy when I was 4. And I thought he was my father. Kind of like your story a little bit. I was like, I thought he was my dad, and he wasn't. I started asking a lot of questions, found out my mom was married, and she showed me pictures, told me what his name was. His name was the same as mine. And I got really curious. And then when I was 12, I ran into him by accident.
Interesting.
Yeah, total fluke. And we had a relationship for a few months. He was remarried. He had his 2-year-old son, another one on the way. And I just remember after a few months of us kind of hanging out, I hung out with him, hung out with his wife and his 2-year-old son. And I just remember like things got strained, I think, for him a little bit. Like I could just remember things felt heavy, and I couldn't put my finger on it. But I'm sure he was only 35 at the time. I think he was really just trying to get a grip on what our dynamic really was. And then unfortunately, we just parted ways, and that was it. And so he was out of my life again. And what I could tell you when I was 12 is I really hit like a super dark spot in my life. I kind of gave up on school. I just ate. I like overate like crazy. Gained a lot of weight as a kid. Failed 8th grade, and had to do 8th grade all over again. And then went on to high school. Did fine in high school. Graduated college, and then met the woman I'm married to now. And what I can tell you is from, my whole life, my mom was married 3 times, dated men in between. She tended to date kind of the same guy. Like,
isn't that the pattern?
Yeah. Yeah. Heavy drinker and kind of toxic and best of all intentions, but just didn't show up the way they could have. So here I was 30 years old, married for a couple years. My wife and I were expecting our first son. I was at a Starbucks at a meeting with someone I worked with, and who came walking in to get their coffee, but my father. Hadn't seen him in 18 years.
Wow.
And I knew exactly who he was when he walked in. He hadn't changed much. Just looked a little older. And from then on out, that was 15 years ago. We've had a relationship now ever since. I wouldn't say it's the typical father-son relationship, but we're friends. He's still married to the same woman. He's been married to her for 40 years plus now. And I have 2 younger half brothers, and everything is good. But what I will tell you is Good Dad Project started back in like 2012, and it really came out of a tremendous low point in my life and how I was showing up as a husband and father. And I knew I wanted better for my kids, but exactly everything that I was resisting seemed to persist. So all the bad habits I was trying to break, I was doing. And I just decided one day, I was like, I've had enough of this. And I was really successful in my work. So I was in sales and sales management and led teams and always did really well in my career. And I was like, what if I just treated this fatherhood thing just like I do anything else, that I learn, and just go out and be a student of it and, learn as much as I can and then implement it. And that surrender to that mentality of it and basically releasing ego around being a father was the most freeing thing ever. And so I was like, oh, I'll just write about this as I do it. And 2015, I was like, I'm tired of writing. I think I'll start a podcast, and started podcasting about it. And I was just on the show this morning, and I shared with that host, I was like, yeah, I had 10 good, because as we stand like today, as you and I record, it's the 5th year anniversary of the podcast. And I remember like, wow, I think I have 10 good ideas for shows, and the rest is I'm on God's good humor after that.
Isn't that
And
the way this goes? It's
yeah,
like people ask me like, well, why are you doing this, guest, or why are you asking? It's like, I don't know. Maybe it's what I'm called into, or as you probably also feel what somebody is calling you to do. And I think it's interesting when you talk about that role of fathers that you had sort of probably grown up thinking, well, fathers come and fathers go. They're not really required to stick around. Mommies are. And then how they come and how they go is always a mystery. You and I shared a little bit beforehand that my father and I, my biological father and I, grew up very much estranged. I mean, I gave him as much credit as maybe a distant uncle. Like he knew my name and knew some of my history, but we never shared history. And we never got the chance to really reconnect.
right.
Partly just because of physical, it became too much work to reconnect because I had to like catch him up. Every time we'd get together, I'd have to give him like a whole year's worth of my life and my feelings and my like what. It was like, you know what? Let's just pick up where you want to pick up. So when you started the Good Dad Project, it was to make you a gooder dad, so to speak. What was the goal? Like when you said, this is what a good dad will look like if I go towards this.
That's a good question. I've never been asked that. And to tell you the truth, I didn't know. Had no clue what it looked like. I just knew how I was showing up wasn't it. So
Which is what? So for those of us that may be showing up that way or knowing that we're not going in the direction we need to, what does that showing up look like or did look like?
So I'll share with you that for me, the way I grew up, there was a part of me that I couldn't wait to be a father because I wanted to break that pattern. I was like, I cannot wait to do this because man, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it amazing. Right. And then what I realized is just like anything else, it's kind of like showing up to a marathon and never running. It's like, hey, you're all excited about it, but you never ran. And now you got to run 26 miles. 26.2 for the marathon runners. They get really picky about that.
The last two is all the critical.
The last 0.2 is the tough. But for me, I wanted to execute fatherhood so well. I didn't want to lose my patience. I didn't want to yell. I wanted to connect with my kids. I wanted to connect with my wife. What I realized though is my upbringing was I learned a lot of great lessons of what not to do. So I was stuck in this sort of limbo of like, okay, well, I know what not to do, but I don't know what good looks like. So what is that? It's almost like if you were to go out and someone told you, hey, I want you to go build me a house and here's 100 ways not to do it. And you're like, well, where do I start? How do I even begin? How do I pour the foundation? How do I frame it in? How do I drywall? How do I, all these things, right? So I didn't know what good looked like. I had an image of what I thought it would look like, which is I just want, if my kids are freaking out, I don't want to freak out with them. I want to give them space to have an emotional response and I don't want to be in it with them. I don't want to yell and scream. That wasn't working. I wanted to connect with my wife and my wife and I were really disconnected. We weren't really talking. And here's what I did. I did what I think a lot of men do. And this is not a dig on men. It's just, I think it's what we feel like at the time, it's what we should do. I did what made me feel good. I was good at my job, got a lot of validation out of my job. Men need three things: validation, appreciation, and respect. I got that in my job. So that's what I went and did. Anytime I was stressed out at home, I just worked more. And I was into all kinds of different hobbies and stuff too. I was really into martial arts. So I was going to martial arts like 4 times a week. And my wife sat me down after a year and she's like, it's kind of not what I signed up for. You're not really in this. Like, I'm like, no, I'm in this. She's like, yeah, but you're not here. It's just, so she gave me some tough love and it was what I needed. So that was the disconnect, I think, was just didn't know how to do it. So I distracted myself with other things.
Which I often say the same is true for men in general. We're really good at one thing really well. Like it's the hunt the bear thing. Just hunt the bear, kill the bear, drag it home, drag it home, drag it home. If you asked us to do 3 things simultaneously, we'd fail at all 3. And so we began to look, as you said, for that moment of gratification, that thing that rewards us. And obviously, because I think in some ways we're men, the quicker we get the reward, the quicker we become addicted. Parenting has zero rewards. I mean, now people are going to say, no, there's those joyful moments when they walk or they talk. But for me, I was always trying to fix, solve, move to the next milestone. And kids just don't operate that way.
I would disagree with you on that one. And I would disagree with you humbly, because I think judging by how I used to operate, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of wins. I think you have to very purposely and intentionally look for the win. So, like, for example, right now we're COVID-19 quarantine, right? And
I laugh because
yeah, being in a house with 4 boys, 14, 12, 6, and 4, it's like being in a house trapped with drunks, that don't want to sleep and eat all your food and do obnoxious things. It's just like, for the love of God, like, I realize you have a hard time aiming when you pee, but do you have to pee on the wall?
Yeah.
Things like that. So here's what I'll tell you. Like last night, my wife, I think one of the toughest times at night for my wife and I is bedtime. And it's because we're both just smoked from the day. And the 4-year-old and the 6-year-old definitely need extra, they want their books, they want their bath, they want that, and which is fine. We do all those things, but our bodies and minds are just smoked at the end of the day. And then my 12-year-old and 14-year-old are still at the age where they want us to tuck them in and hang out with them. And it's an hour to an hour and a half routine, putting just the kids to bed. And my wife and I were talking about it last night. I was like, we really have to be intentional about recognizing and appreciating what's good here. We get to put these kids to bed because you and I are going to turn around 10 years from now. And if this whole COVID thing were to have happened 10 years from now, the silence in this home would be deafening.
Yes.
The fact that we hear mom and dad and laughter and screaming and crying and all this other stuff, you have to take some enjoyment in that. And the last example I'll share with you is last night we're having dinner as a family, and it's a total chaotic show. And I always have like these expectations, of like, oh, we're all going to sit down and talk about each other's day and it's going to be great. And it's never like that.
Lifelong memories.
It's never like that. I have one kid who's rubbing mashed potatoes on the other one's face. I got the other one crying. I got the other one who's trying to talk over the chaos, who gets frustrated that he can't talk. My wife tries to say one thing to me and we can't get through 7 words without mom, dad, mom, dad. So, that can be really annoying and it can wear on you. But if you just sort of like, there are times where I close my eyes and I just listen to the chaos and I'm like, thank God for this chaos, because silence would be deafening. Silence would be louder than this. I would miss these days if they weren't here right now. So I'd have to choose to really appreciate it and take this as a win, because the polar opposite of this situation where it's just she and I, or God forbid ever happen, just me, that's a world of torture I would never want to be in, and would be 10x worse than the situation I'm dealing with right now.
I love that perspective. And I have to agree. Somebody once told me early on, the days go by very slowly, but the years fly past. And so my son is now 11. I swear I don't know where 6 years went, because like five was a really clear year. And I thought the other day, I'm like, we have 7 Christmases left. Like, granted, if you want to hang around after that, but I only have legal jurisdiction over your Christmas attendance for 7 more. I thought, oh my gosh, only 7? I mean, like, when I look at my perspective and my age, but again, and you're right, it's when you start to think of how quickly it's gone, or how quickly they're moving in a direction that doesn't include you at the same intensity. That's why we took 3 years off and went expatting, was because I was able to literally like spend every day, like we did everything together. We were teasing about it the other night. It's like, remember when we used to have to do everything together? So when you're looking at COVID and you're looking at being a father and you're adding that extra stress of having to do the homeschool and having like all of the things that have been added to the schedule and added to the stress, And our kids, we think they're not responding, but they are so absorbing and responding to it. How do you go back to those 9 principles of patience and gratitude and things like that? How do you keep that in front of you?
I think that's one of the hardest things. I think you have to choose those things before they even happen. So tonight, I'm as we have this conversation, I'm reflecting on what dinner is going to be like. And as I think about it, I'm like, there could be an absolute chaotic show going on, and I am going to look through the eyes of appreciation and curiosity. And don't get me wrong, I mean, there's boundaries, right? There's discipline. You don't do certain things at the dinner table. It's not like it's a free for all. But the tiny things that would normally annoy you, I'm going to choose to let those go and choose to appreciate that they're here now. Because they're not going to be there forever.
So how is parenting your oldest different than parenting your youngest? Because obviously the 14-year-old kind of like was the guinea pig.
That's a good question. All 4 of my boys are totally different from each other.
Which one eats the meat with their hand, no matter how many utensils are sitting next to them?
Which one eats with his hand? That would be my 6-year-old. He eats everything with his fingers. So
even
yeah,
soup, probably.
yeah. My 14-year-old, he has obviously way different needs right now. So my thing with him is I want to have more conversations with him, not at him. My thing is raising him to be a good, solid, hardworking young man. I remember, when he was just little and everything was new, and you fear for him, like even going outside. Now, like with having 3 more kids behind him, like now that we have a 4-year-old, it's just like, I'm just going to enjoy this. Like all the things I would be afraid of normally, I'm just going to enjoy it. All the things that I would used to second guess, I'm not going to. And I'm just going to enjoy this kid being 4 and being little right now, because that's not going to last forever.
And I can see you're waiting for one of them to come busting in, so don't freak if they do.
No, I got my 12-year-old at the door right now. So
yeah, it's like, can I go out? Yeah, they never get it. So when you're talking to your 14-year-old and you're telling them that someday you're going to be a man, someday you're going to be a father, someday you're going to be a husband, how does that conversation sound? Because obviously you didn't have that conversation with your father or the subsequent stand-in fathers. How did you figure out what that conversation should look like? What material, what references did you create to say, this is how I want it to sound?
So I ask a lot of questions. I ask a lot of what we call generative questions with my kids. I try to do as little telling as possible. So I try to, they're going to tune me out after like 7 seconds. It's pretty much
Good. I got 2.
Right. So it's like, I mean, it doesn't matter if they're your kids or people you work with. Usually people are on their own agenda unless you're engaging them in questions, good questions. So instead of telling him, hey, what does a good man look like? Or, here's what a good man is. It's this, it's this, it's this, it's this. Instead, what does a good man mean to you? What do you value when you think of being a good man? What do you value most? What things come to mind? And getting inside the head of him, he usually comes up with way better things than I would teach. So and then it's acknowledging and appreciating what he's sharing with me, because these are his ideas. Now, if he needs guidance here and there, sure, I'll step in and but the thing I try to stay away from is, but you have to think about this. It's usually always and you have to and think about this, because the last thing I want to do is, if he has a really good idea that's super important to him, I don't want to degrade that idea to be like, yeah, but, because what I just did was pretty much crap all over his valuable idea or his code of ethic in some way, shape, or form. I want him to be his own man.
I so learned that the hard way. My son was in karate or the equivalent, and he had a really great class. and we were walking out, said, you did this and you did that, and this was good and that was good. I just like couldn't, just so proud. And I said, but, and before I could even say what came after, he goes, so I didn't have a good class? And what I meant to say, what I was intending was, but remember, no shoes on the mat, which is like, small compared to big win, zeroed it out. And so from then on, it was like, okay, but not, or and not but, and remember to take your shoes off. Because it just adds the caboose instead of wrecks the train of what I just gave them. So I love that. As a dad, and as somebody who grew up with dads that came and went and probably weren't always the most positive influences, how do you decide what other men or other men of influence you allow into your kids' lives? Like, do you have filters, and what do those filters look like?
That's a really good question. Each one of my kids, I think, has played for a coach on a sporting team that was less than ideal.
Did you pull him?
Huh?
Did you pull him from the team?
So we would have more conversations about it. It depends on how bad it really was. Like, for instance, my oldest, when he was 11, he played hockey for this guy who was a total maniac. This guy should have been nowhere near youth athletics. Like, he should have been coaching college teams, not
college teams in the Bronx.
Right, college teams in the Bronx. Instead, he got to coaching 11U rec, not competitive rec hockey. And this guy would drop the F-bomb. This guy would yell and scream. And this is a true testament to 80% of kids will leave sports because of the coach. So my son, who loved hockey, loved it, never wanted to play hockey again after that. So here's what I'll tell you about my influence there. We would talk all the time to and from practices and games and that kind of thing. And it was a great opportunity for him to be exposed to the diversity of personalities and people who are ultra competitive, do or die, sweep the leg, no mercy, strike first, all that stuff. And I mean, this coach, he was terrible. He got kicked out of 3 games. I think almost every other game, one of our kids ended up in the box because of a call. He was yelling at the refs too much. So he put one of the kids in the box. So I told my son, I was like, this whole situation is not ideal. We both know that this guy should not be coaching your team. However, he is. So you're going to run into people like this as you get older. You're going to work with someone who's got a bad attitude. You're going to be on a team with another kid who's got a bad attitude. You're going to have people that want to push you around. You're going to have people say words you don't agree with. But this is a great opportunity for you to really understand what it is you want to take as far as lessons of what you do want to do moving forward and what you don't. So I would ask them, like, hey, what have you learned about how you're going to live your life from this guy and what you're not going to do? Well, I'm not going to scream at people. I'm not going to curse at people. I'm not going to act like a child and get kicked out of games. I was like, okay, well, those are good, valuable lessons, right? Because sometimes some of the most valuable lessons are the things that we're not going to do. Now, I will say this. I asked him, I was like, do you want to play next year? And he said, no, I don't. Now, I will tell you this. I loved that decision. I was not going to fight him on that decision to stay. I've never intervened, but that was probably the closest I've ever come to intervening. The other thing too, I have my 12-year-old right now. School comes pretty easy to him, and he's got a teacher right now that's really testing him. She used to teach high school. Now she's teaching 6th grade, but she wants to put a workload on these kids like a high school student. And like, I mean, I have told my wife, I was like, this woman's a pain in the rear. Like, the amount of work she puts on these kids is absolutely ridiculous. And she's I've sat down with her and I've said, I've never been one of those parents that likes to intervene, but her expectations are crazy. I'm talking like these kids have to read 40 to 50 pages of a book a night.
On top of being homeschooled or distance learning, where
right.
Structure and the chaos and the demands. Yeah.
Right. So, my conversation with her was like, do these 6th graders really have to read 50 pages of a book a night? I mean, that's basically they're knocking out more than a book a week. Like, that's more than Anybody does. So, she kind of pushed back on me. She's like, well, we got to develop their love of learning right now. And I blatantly told her, I was like, my son used to love to read before he was in your class. And now he doesn't like to read. I was like, so anyway, I intervened that one time, but it fell on deaf ears, but I mean, that's fine. But my lesson back to him was like, look, you're going to have teachers you don't like. And he actually has no clue I had that conversation with her. I'm not going to tell him that. But I was like, there's going to be teachers that you're not going to like. They're going to have expectations of you don't agree with. They're still your teacher. And you still got to do the work. So is there some way you can find your sweet spot with it, your happiness with it, and get through it? And it's taught him a good lesson, I think, in grit, to where like, hey, I'm going to bite this and I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. So, that's been some of the lesson, I think, when it comes to outlandish expectations on some kids, especially at that age. I had to read close to that much, but it wasn't until I was a senior in high school and I took a lit class.
And it's interesting because so I intervene all the time just because that's my nature. But my son is a very literal thinker. Like if you picked up the phone and called him and asked him what he was doing, he'd say talking on the phone. It's like, no, like what were you doing earlier? He doesn't think it. And if he gets a question in class and the teacher gives him an answer and it doesn't quite line up with what he's trying to discover, he won't ask the second, third, fourth layer question. He just backs down. So I had to tell the teacher, I'm like, look, he'll ask you a question. And if you told him blue moons fly through the sky at noon, that's what he'll believe. He won't challenge you because that's just his nature. So, so one of the things that I had to learn as a dad was to let go of my expectations of what a man is, what a good son should look like. When he was born, I was like, oh, he's going to be a West Point graduate. He's going to be shoulders back, standing tall, military. He was going to be the furthest thing from that. How is a dad, when you look at each of your four, do you give enough space for them to become who they're supposed to be, but still keep those guardrails in check?
So, that's a good question. So foundationally, we live by codes of ethics, in our house when it comes to decisions we make and what we do, how we operate.
Are those codes of ethics written or just understood?
Understood.
And do you review them with the kids, or is it just sort of between you and your wife and you have that under the table kick?
So my wife and I do review them. So like, for instance, a code of ethics. So an example of that, a code of ethic between my wife and I is when we argue, we always fight fair. So when we argue, we don't raise our voice higher than the way I'm talking to you right now. We never call each other names. She's never called me a name. I've never called her a name in the 24 years I've known her. There are times where if the other person has had enough and they need a bit of a break, they're like, I need a minute. And we respect that. So that's a code of ethic that we instill in the kids. Like, hey, this is how a functional relationship really works. Another code of ethics is honesty. And in our house, you're more rewarded for honesty. So even if you did something wrong. So if my kids did something wrong, if you lie about it, you will be punished. If you tell the truth, we'll have a conversation, but you won't be punished.
That's ours.
Yeah.
Like often I'll say, did you do this? And you can see that little debate going in. And if I get a yes, I'll just turn and be like, okay, thanks. And there's this look of like, that's it? That's all. I'm like, look, I just needed to know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there will be a conversation around it, like we'll talk, and we'll ask questions and how might we make better decisions moving forward when it comes to something like this. But you're not gonna be grounded because of you were honest.
How do you manage? So I'm sure your 14 is aware of the code of conduct or the family values a little more in depth than the 4 and the 6-year-old. Now, as he begins to move into 16, 18, 21. Are the code of conducts growing with him, or just the way he applies them?
I would say just the way he applies them. If I look at my 14-year-old, the way he operates, I'm really proud of the way he operates. He's always honest. He's not into anything insane. Like I'll test him every now and again. And like, when do you see yourself trying alcohol? And he's like, I have no interest in that. And I'm like, really? Because like your
For
friends,
me?
I know. I was like, your friends are gonna dare you to do it. You know, you're gonna get a lot of peer pressure. You're gonna get that cute girl. Hey, come on, have a drink with me. You know, and he's like, no, I'm standing firm on that one. So I'll put him in like kind of like small, like little testing grounds of like what's gonna happen. You know, like, hey, it's a matter of time before someone offers you drugs. It's just the way it is. In fact, I'm shocked it hasn't happened yet. Here's what that's going to look like. Here's what peer pressure is going to feel like. And when it comes time for you to have decision time, what are you going to say? And then the cool thing about our relationship is it's very, very open. So like, I mean, and to protect his confidentiality, he has talked about becoming young man type stuff. Very open to the point where I'm like, wow, I wouldn't ask these questions or even say this to one of my parents. And I always know I was like, my job is to welcome these questions and this conversation, because a good mentor of mine stated, without connection, you have no influence. And the way to disconnect from your kid is to shame or guilt them for something that they're asking you or telling you. That means that's very sensitive to them. So my son will ask me questions about things that are going on in his life. And there's that part of me that's like, ooh, wow, okay. And my response is always like, that's a good question, you know, or like, that's an interesting question. I've never really thought of that one. Give me a second here. Versus like, whoa, dude, you know, because that's the last thing I want to do. And so keeping that open line of communication with him is so important, because here's the thing: at 16, 17 years old, there's going to be wrong turns. There's going to be temptations. There's going to be all kinds of things that are flying his way. And he is going to need a landing pad. I don't want my kids ever to be like, oh my God, crap just hit the fan. I got to make sure my dad never finds out about this. I want my kids to say, crap just hit the fan. I need to call my dad. That's what I want. And that's what I want to create.
I love that imagery of being a landing pad. My father, or my stepfather, who pretty much raised me, is a German Lutheran mechanical engineer who survived World War II. So everything was very disciplined, very regimented, always perfect. Like he never made a mistake. That's his legacy for life. And I remember sitting down with him, and he was in his workshop doing whatever he does in his workshop. And I went in and I sat on the stool that was always there, and I was like, okay, I can do this. I can ask this question. You know, the beads of sweat are pouring. I've been like planning it for a whole week, waiting for him to go down to the workshop so we could be alone. And I said, how do you know if a girl likes you? Like, that is like the big question, the moment of manhood that I have been. And he said, you just know. I had no follow-up, nowhere to go. And at that moment, I don't know if I consciously knew it, but I kind of developed this like, you better just start knowing stuff. Because that's what you're supposed to do. You're just supposed to know. Like, and if you screw up, you better know how to fix it, because that stool is not the place to go and figure it out.
Right. And that's, I think if anything, you know, that maybe a listener or a parent can take from this is, you know, give your kid that landing pad that they need, because things are going to go wrong and you want that connection. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be discipline, boundaries, lessons, tough love, maybe some grounding and that kind of thing. Sure. But at the end of the day, it's about connection. You know, if you ask me what code of ethics and how we operate, everything is about that connection and that environment. Do we land on it all the time? Man, you talk about imposter syndrome. You know, I run this podcast. I facilitate our mastermind group for men. And I'm the first one to tell you that I make a gazillion mistakes a day. Like there are some days, like I'll get off this podcast and I'll share insights on being a better father. Then I'll go downstairs and yell at my kids. And I'm like, what am I doing? But
what I do.
but I do feel that one of my gifts and one of my saving graces is my humility. So like when I do mess up, I will come to my kids and I'm like, look, it's been a stressful day. That's no excuse. And what you did wasn't right. And I should not have spoke to you like that. Like I shouldn't have raised my voice in such a way. My perfect example of this COVID-19 has really thrown my 14-year-old a total, his mind is a mess because school does not come easy to him. This homeschool thing is driving him crazy. He's super stressed out. And last night I was helping him with his homework and he could tell that I was getting quite a bit frustrated because he wasn't catching on to some pretty simple lessons that were a part of his homework. And I was getting quite a bit frustrated. And I didn't yell at him or anything, but he could tell that I was getting frustrated. And afterwards, I just shared with him, I'm like, look, man, I don't mean to come across frustrated with you because you know what, you're probably thinking like, gosh, this is like the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I'm not in my school. I don't have my teachers. I'm trying to figure this stuff out on my own through videos and all this other stuff. And I can completely understand why you're so frustrated and like probably want to throw your computer out the window. And when I help you, I will challenge you a little bit, to use some strategy, to use some common sense. And when I see you, overthinking something or start to give up, I will get probably frustrated with you. And I don't want you to give up, because we don't do that. I'm here to help you in any way I can. But just know that when you start to sabotage yourself, I will step in and give you a little bit of tough love. I just didn't deliver it the way I should have. So I apologize for that.
Can I play that back for my son? Because we're going through this.
Yeah.
He defeats himself so quickly. And I'm like, dude, you know that, like, duh. Like, I get mad because he knows it. He's just afraid to speak it because it's not, and he won't explore so I have forfeited teaching him. I mean, I'll teach him anything else, but sitting at the desk, his tension goes up. We're not a good match. So yeah. I'm just going to play him that and say, this is what I meant to say when I got mad and left the other day. It was interesting. You started to say, we don't do that. When you were talking about him giving up, how often do you use that term? Like we, meaning this family, this tribe, this thing that you're a part of. This is what we do.
All the time. I never hardly ever use you or I. We, it's always we. Even if I'm talking about me, we, because, we're 6 people in this house and me trying to impose what I think you should do because I think you should do it, that takes hey, we're like Team Hagner here, right? And this is part of what we do here. We don't give up and we support each other and we definitely don't talk poorly of ourselves. So my son will do that where he'll be like, my son gets very frustrated. My son is a wonderful, empathetic, he's got a lot of wonderful gifts. And one of them, it just isn't schoolwork. But he will outwork you though, to make grades. Like, so he gets A, B's and C's, and he has to work his tail off for it. And that's what I always tell him. He's like, I'm really stupid. I don't get this. And I was like, stupid by what? What are you measuring it by? Well, I measure it by school. I was like, is school the only measure of your intelligence? I was like, your phone, the phone that you have in your hand, Steve Jobs made that phone. He didn't finish college. I was like, by all means, like Steve was flunking out of college, yet he's one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. Albert Einstein was an average student, but yet he was one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. I always tell him, I'm like, Ethan, school is one tiny measure of smarts. Okay. There are people that people went to school with. You're probably thinking right now, like people that you went to school with who probably got straight A's, that you're like, that didn't do anything with their life, nothing. And then there are people who are average students or maybe even below average students who blew up the world in some way, shape or form. And I always tell them, I'm like, look, school is going to teach you how to think. Okay. School will teach you work ethic. I always tell them, like, dude, your money card is the fact that you're willing to outwork people. That's it. You get a C, so what? You had to work harder than the person who got the A, so what? They're once they get out in the real world and they're tasked with some massive project and they're not used to working that hard, what do you think they're going to do? And then they're going to give it to you and you're like, all I have to do is not give up. That's it. Bring it, So those are the things I always try to reinforce with him with school. I'm like, look, I don't care what grades you make. At the end of the day, no one's going to ask you what you got in 7th grade math. The thing that I want you to do is don't sabotage yourself. Do not give up. Work as hard as you can. We're here to help you. This will teach you how to think and work hard. Other than that, you'll probably use 4% of what you learn in school. So keep that in mind.
I got that today because we were studying the cherry mine disaster of 1909. And he asked me a question. I'm like, so I asked my phone, who gave me the answer that solved the problem? I'm like, I know where to find the answer. I don't need to know the answer. And I know what looks logical. So I want to sort of bring in a couple of last questions. I know that fun and faith play a big role in your position as a dad. I saw the fun when somebody's eye got put out during Nerf war last month. I think your poor wife must just be like, if I only had 4 kids instead of 5, things would be easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're in the mix. And did you grow up as the only boy in your house?
Yeah. So it depended on who my mom was with. I had sort of step siblings that were kind of in and out quite a bit. I'm my mom's and dad's only son. So like sometimes I was an only child. Sometimes I had siblings. Sometimes it just depended on who she was with and how long and if they were living with us or not.
Because clearly you're stuck somewhere between like an 8 and a 12-year-old when it comes to playing with your kids.
That's pretty much about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And they never get to win if you have an option. So I get the fun part. How does faith play in? And how does your faith versus the family's faith versus allowing your kids to figure out their own?
That's such a good question. So I made a commitment to myself that I was going to improve my relationship with God in 2020 because I kind of always, I grew up with faith in my life. I grew up Catholic and I've always gone to church and went to Catholic schools and all that good stuff. And so I've always had faith as a part of my life, but it's always been very small. And no knock on Catholics. I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but like, I remember growing up Catholic and it was always like, as you got your sacraments, it was kind of like this checkbox, you got baptism, first communion, confirmation.
How old are you? You should be doing this year.
Yeah. And I kind of had this realization not too long ago where my kids, it was my 12-year-old when he was 7, he was getting his first communion. He was like, why do I get my first communion in 2nd grade? I'm like, because you do. well, what does it mean? And I'm like, well, it's, you're receiving the body and blood of God, of Christ. And he's just like, well, why in 2nd grade and not in 1st grade? And I'm like, because that's just what you do. Like, that was my answer. I'm like, this is pitiful. Like, how can I lead these kids with their faith if I don't even understand it, which I didn't. So what I've done now is we still go to church, but I do a Bible, I do a devotional every morning, and I'm in a mentorship program right now called Operation Timothy, where I have a mentor who takes me through. He's Paul and I'm a Timothy, so I'm learning from him. So I'm really understanding the word. And what I do now is I help the kids understand their relationship with God. So and navigate those things. And if I don't know, man, I just don't know. But my view is like, hey, I don't know that answer, but let's go look it up. Let's go figure it out. So we're all kind of students together, I would say right now. As far as leading the family with faith, there's gratitude that we thank God for. There's prayer. There's conversation, and we don't look at God as a genie in a bottle. And that's what I could definitely say I was guilty of is, like when I really needed something, I'd pray. And I've sort of done away with that. God deserves my time and reflection every day. He gets my time every morning. And the cool thing that I get to hear, like my 14-year-old said it yesterday. He's like, when is COVID going to be over? I miss going to church. And I'm like, man, you would have never heard me say that at 14. And the fact that he's saying that, I'm
in Sunday school with him that he's got his eye on.
right. But I mean, like for him to say that, I was like, wow, that's really powerful. I couldn't tell you what we're doing right. I don't know. In fact, there's probably a lot we're doing wrong. I mean, I wish I understood it, but I will say this, like, if you can have a relationship with God and pray and there's gratitude and there's reflection and you're a student, um, then and if you're obedient, right, to the word, I mean, that's the big thing, then I feel like I'm guiding them in about the simplest way I can without really truly mastering it myself just yet.
There's a great book. It's called Home Run Life. Kevin Myers is the author, and he was trying to explain to his sons what a relationship looks like. And he couldn't get it. He just like, I don't know how to, like, I can't talk their language. I can't break it down. And so he created what was initially called the diamond life. And then he realized it looks like a baseball diamond. And then he said, wait a minute. How can I use this sports analogy that my boys are so into baseball to show them what living a life of faith would look like? And so he birthed the book, The Home Run Life. Phenomenal book. It's a great, and there's also, if you're like, hey, I could do this with my son, there's an online study guide type of thing available through the same title. And I don't get credit from PK for promoting the book, but it's one on my bookshelf. So when you look back, so you got 4 kids, 14, 12, 6, and 4, all boys. I know you're not even going to try the girl thing. You'll just wait until they start dating and then you have granddaughters, huh?
Exactly.
Each of them is very unique. I know this from my kid, and each of them has a different quality. Like when you look at it, it's like, man, that is their giftedness. That is the thing that just intrigues you. Going through your kids, what are each of their qualities, or that thing that when you look at it, it's like, that's uniquely yours to own?
Oh, that's such a good question. My 14-year-old is empathy. He can read people like Noah, and he's always had this skill ever since he was even little. He could look at you and be like, "Are you doing okay? Like you just seem like you've had a bad day, or like you seem really happy today. Something what good happened?" He's very good at reading people. He's also good at asking good questions. So he'll ask me, hey, what was the best part of your day? But it's probably also because I ask him that all the time. What's the best part of your day? What's the most challenging part of your day? What are you most excited about tomorrow? Those are 3 questions I ask him all the time. He's really good at reading people and asking good questions. My 12-year-old, and he has a love of music. So we've tried every sport with him. He just didn't jive well with sports, and he loves music and he loves playing saxophone. So like, I love hearing him play. My 12-year-old, he's on the flip side of the school thing. So school comes easy to him. Athletics come easy to him. He was the type of kid I hated growing up because everything comes easy to him. But the one really cool thing that I can definitely say about my 12-year-old Mason is that he is like his own kid, and he's humble, but yet very confident, but he's not in your face confident at all. So like there was this, I went and had lunch with him at his school several months ago. And there's this girl, she's like the prettiest girl in his class who liked him. And she was sitting at one table, like looking at him, staring at him. And he was with his group of boys. And I was sitting there and I was just watching all this unfold, like this girl, like kind of like looking at him and smiling. And they're like, dude, how did you get her to like you? And he just like looked at him. He's like, what are you talking about? Like, how did you get her to like you? Like, where, like, she's like the prettiest one. He's like, I don't know. Like, I'm me, I guess. Like, I didn't do anything. Like, and I was like, wow, that's like a super genuine answer. Like, he looked at him like they were like, well, what would I would have done? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm just me. And I just love the fact he wasn't like, well, I'm me. Why wouldn't she like me? He was more like, I don't know. Like, I didn't do anything. Like, I'm just me, I guess. So I thought that was really cool. My 6-year-old, we call him the Chris Farley of the family. He's by far the comedian. He is like, if you look at birth order, I mean, he's kind of like the forgotten child a little bit. He's not the baby and he's not the oldest. So he's kind of like right there. So he likes to make his attention known, and he is a goofball. So he always makes us laugh. And then the baby, Colton, he's 4, and he's definitely, he milks that cuteness factor. He knows he's cute, and he likes to mess with you with his cuteness. So yeah, they're all just very different in different ways.
See, and it's the gift that you have of being able to just go through that and see them as individuals and pull out those qualities. I can tell that when you made the commitment to create the Good Dad Project in yourself, that you really said, I want to be able to connect with my kids. And as you said, without connection, I can't influence and I can't connect with them unless I know them. And so you really intimately know each and every one of your kids.
I truly appreciate you saying that. You know, it's like I said, I feel like I stumbled for 6 years of my oldest son's life, 4 years of my second born, and still stumble. But you know, the podcast and the work, you know, I get to do now is made that easier, and it's made it more enjoyable. And when I fall down and have bad moments, I'm able to dive into our community and the podcast and just read different things to just refocus and not self-sabotage. But I definitely appreciate you saying that. I feel like it's almost too much credit.
You got 4 and everybody's still alive. You've done well.
Yeah, so far. I mean, I could go downstairs and one could be bleeding out, but you know, hopefully not.
If they haven't tattled, then it's even better.
Right.
So as we move forward as dads, and I sort of said that I really feel like this COVID is a chance for some of us to reconnect to our dad-ness, because we're almost forced to in some ways because we're home and we're seeing our kids in different environments. What is the advice that you would give to the dads that are like, I want to get my dad-ness back. I want to lean into being a dad. Aside from joining your mastermind, which is available at the Good Dad Project.
Yeah. I mean, everything we do for that is at gooddadproject.com/alliance. So there's an application there, but yeah, we've got 400 plus guys who do life together virtually. But yeah, that's a great community if you're interested in that. The one thing that I'll tell you though, in its simplest form, is asking, you know, the quality of your life depends on the quality of the questions you ask yourself and people around you. So like for instance, I think a lot of people learn in story, and a lot of people are so focused on things are not the same. Why can't they be the same? Why can't I just go see this person? Or why can't I work like I used to? Or why every question it usually begins with why can't I? Our brains are wired to problem solve. They're a highly functional computer. Whatever question you ask, it's like Google. It will tell you the answer. It doesn't decipher but good or bad questions. So if you're asking yourself poor questions, you're gonna have poor outcomes. Now, a perfect example. So we don't like to use the why can't we question. We like to use the how might we question. That's how we operate in the family. How might we? And I'll share with you, I mean, I've known my wife for 24 years. We've been married for 16 years. And for the past 24 Easters, we are 23 Easters, we have always spent Easter with her extended family, which there's 70 of them, all kinds of kids. There's Easter egg hunts, there's candy, there's libation, it's just fun. You know, we're adults are having fun, kids are having fun. It's just enjoy the weather. This was the first year in 24 years that we hadn't done that. And we woke up just with this empty feeling on Easter, like, this really sucks. This really is setting in. The kids don't have a normal Easter like they used to. They don't get to see the Easter bunny. They're not like out hunting Easter eggs. And why can't we do it? Like, why can't it be like it used to be? You know, and then we all kind of got in this rut. And then my wife and I kind of reset and we're like, how might we connect as a family in a way that we never have because of the circumstances that we have right now? And when you ask yourself questions like that, your mind immediately goes to work of like, yeah, how might we do that? So we put together these wooden cars, like little car kits you get at Lowe's, like that kind of thing. That took like an hour of our time. It was great. The kids, like little hammer and nails and screwdrivers, we made planes and cars and little trucks and race cars. And then we played flag football as a family. My wife was even out there as one of the QBs, you know, when we're out like ripping flags off, we're blaring music out in our backyard, having a blast. Then we came back in and we played Would You Rather over dinner, which was a blast. And we played another board game. And then we had a movie night, and we went to bed that night completely different than how we woke up. We went to bed and I looked at my wife and I was like, that was probably one of the most epic Easters I've ever had. And it all started with a question. How might we connect in a way that we never have, given the circumstances that we have right now? And all those answers came to us. And we were like, wow, like this day could have ended in complete and utter depression and defeat. And it didn't, because of what we were asking ourselves.
I love that. And I guess that really is a great summary, is like, instead of asking, why can't I be a better dad?
Yeah. How
How
might?
might? How might? Not even how can, because that can be challenging because we feel we have to nail it. But the might leaves us room for failure. So that how
Yeah.
might we try it? Like all options are open. Let's go for it.
Yeah. That how might we question is so powerful, because you're right. Most men, why can't I be a better father? Why can't I have more patience? Why can't I have an incredible, legendary marriage? You know, your mind will give you those answers if that's what you're asking. But if you're like, how might I create an epic, legendary marriage with my wife? How might I improve my patience with my kids? How might I connect with them in a way that I never have?
Man, that's gold.
Answers will show up, and it's so simple. It's not our fault, but it's our default to ask bad questions.
But that might, because it means that you don't have to land on one thing right now.
Right.
And I think that's where, at least for me as a dad, I struggle because I want it right. Because I saw the absolute wrong, so I want to nail the right. So you have released me from that. I am humbly and thankful that my son, by the way, is 11. My daughter, who doesn't get as much airtime, in part because she has special needs, so the comparisons are often difficult. She's 9, soon to be 10. It's just a different world. So thank you for giving us your time today. Thank you for teaching me that lesson so clearly of how might I be a better dad?
Yeah, I think we tend to overcomplicate things. You know, we just tend to make things a lot harder than what they need to be. And sometimes it's just the simplest solution is the most effective, right?
Hey, I love it. So again, the Good Dad Project /Alliance.
Yeah, there's no just gooddadproject.com. I mean, if all your listeners just, I mean, you can see everything we do in the nav bar. We got the podcast, we got free resources, we got books, we got
It's a great, I mean, when I stumbled on it, I was like, man, I'm going to be downloading and stealing stuff forever. So thank you for making the commitment to help us all build legacy fatherhoods for the next generation of boys and dads. Anything on our way out the door?
just I always say this at the end of every show, you know, go out and live legendary because legacy is forever. I think when you have that mission of I'm going to go out and live legendary, you know, or how might I live legendary? It's pretty cool what new ideas and inspirations might come about.
I love that. How might I? That's a great gift. That's a great gift for me today. So thank you for giving that. Give the boys a thank you for allowing us to steal you. And man, honor your wife. That poor woman's in just a house full of too much boy energy.
She's a martyr. She is a martyr. Like,
She's
I'm not kidding.
Rushing out the door the first day that COVID is lifted.
Right. She's out of here. So
thank you much, my friend. Thank you much. Have a good afternoon.
hey, you
Thank
too.
you everybody for joining us today. I will see you tomorrow morning. Till then, bye-bye.
Thank you.